The starship Veora was one of the finest vessels of the Tsari Alliance. Sleek silver wings stretched across its massive frame, glowing with blue energy streams as it cut through the black ocean of space. Inside, alien passengers moved with pride. Their tall figures and shining scales reflected the lights of the ship's corridors. They wore garments of bright colors, symbols of their advanced culture. They spoke in tones of superiority, voices filled with the calm certainty of a species that believed it had mastered the galaxy. Among them sat a single human. He had bought the cheapest ticket, choosing the back corner of the passenger deck. His clothes were plain. His dark jacket looked old compared to the polished robes of the aliens around him. He carried no grand device, no glowing tools, no ornaments of rank. He looked out of place, almost invisible, just another small figure lost in the crowd of alien travelers. To the Tsari, he was unimportant. Humans were new to the stars, a young race that still stumbled as it tried to match the power of the great civilizations. The passengers barely glanced at him. Some whispered that humans were fragile, that they could not survive the pressure of true space. Others laughed quietly, wondering why such a weak creature would risk traveling so far from its little blue world. The human heard some of these words, but he said nothing. He simply adjusted his seat, closed his eyes, and listened to the hum of the engines. The ship was filled with sound, distant footsteps, the gentle ring of alien music from small devices, the laughter of children whose skin shimmered like liquid glass. Food carts rolled by, offering sweet glowing fruits and steaming bowls of spiced broth. A group of Tsari nobles debated politics with confident gestures, their long fingers cutting through the air as if commanding unseen armies. To them, the journey was a chance to display knowledge, to prove superiority, and yet the human remained silent. He watched. He listened. His eyes traced the way pipes curved along the ceiling, the way the walls seemed to tremble faintly when the engines shifted. He noticed details that no one else cared about. The uneven hum in the floor, the flicker of a light that should have been steady. These things were small, almost invisible, but to him they meant something. Hours passed. The starship sailed smoothly, jumping between lanes of light that bent across the galaxy. The passengers grew comfortable, confident in their safety. After all, no Tsari ship had ever failed. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything human hands could build. Why would anyone doubt it? But the human did not share their blind faith. He had grown up in a world where machines failed often, where survival sometimes meant fixing a broken generator with nothing but wire and tape. He had seen airplanes land on empty fuel, submarines patched with hands shaking in cold water, and cars held together by desperate work on dusty roads. To him, machines were not perfect. They were challenges waiting to break. It was late into the cycle when the first sign appeared. A faint vibration ran through the floor. It was not the steady rhythm of the ship's heart. It was different, uneven, pulsing, as if something hidden inside was struggling to keep balance. The aliens ignored it. To them, such things were beneath notice. The human opened his eyes. He leaned forward, listening. His ears caught the slight change in tone, the small drop in pitch. He frowned. Soon after, one of the corridor lights flickered. It dimmed, brightened, then dimmed again. An alien passenger waved it away as a minor error. Another laughed, saying, "Tsari ships do not fail. Even the stars themselves would burn out before our engines die." The group cheered at the joke. The human did not laugh. He kept watching the light until it steadied again, though the glow was weaker than before. Then came the alarm. It was soft at first, almost like a whisper beneath the music of the halls. A slow pulsing tone hidden in the walls. The alien crew heard it and stiffened. Their long necks turned sharply as they exchanged worried looks. Passengers noticed and began to murmur. The human sat still, his face calm but his eyes sharp. The captain's voice echoed over the intercom, smooth and steady, but there was a crack in the confidence. "Please remain calm. A minor technical issue is being addressed. There is no danger." But the human knew better. He had heard voices like that before, in storms and crashes in burning factories. The calm words that hid the truth. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He leaned back in his seat, but his heart beat faster. His mind raced, piecing together what he had seen and heard, the vibration, the flickering lights, the tone of the alarm. He whispered to himself, words no one else could hear. "Engines don't lie. Something is breaking." The aliens laughed nervously, convincing themselves it was nothing, but the human kept his eyes fixed on the wall, where he could almost feel the ship's heartbeat slowing, uneven and uncertain. He was just a passenger. He had no place on the command deck, no authority among these proud creatures. To them he was nothing, and yet deep inside he felt it, the weight of something coming. Something that would test not the strength of the Tsari, but the will of a single unnoticed human. The ship groaned faintly, like a wounded beast. The lights dimmed again, and in that moment the human knew. Their journey was about to change forever. The silence after the alarm was worse than the alarm itself. For a moment the great ship Veora seemed frozen, caught in an invisible grip. Passengers glanced at one another, their shining eyes reflecting unease, but no one dared to say what they truly felt. The hum of the engines, the steady heartbeat of the vessel had changed. It was weaker now, uneven, like a giant creature gasping for air. The alien pilots on the bridge moved quickly. Their long arms danced across glowing panels, pressing symbols that shifted like flowing water. Blue light flooded their screens and strange glyphs spun around, forming warnings no human eye could read. The crew whispered in clipped voices, sharp and tense. To the untrained ear it sounded like order, but the human passenger could hear something else in those tones. Fear. The passengers tried to stay calm, trusting the crew. The Tsari had ruled the stars for centuries. Their technology had crossed black holes, storms of plasma, and silent regions where other ships had vanished forever. Surely they could fix a minor failure. A few laughed nervously, clinging to the captain's promise. Mothers pulled children close, their shimmering skin glowing faintly in the dimmed light. The scent of burned metal filled the air, sharp and bitter. The human sat still, but his eyes darted everywhere. He noticed the small tremors in the floor, the way each vibration was slower than the last. He leaned closer to the wall and pressed his palm against it. The metal was hot, too hot. Something deep inside the engines was struggling. A sudden jolt shook the ship. The passengers cried out as the walls groaned. Drinks spilled, glowing fruits rolled across the floor, and a child screamed. The artificial gravity wavered for a heartbeat, making stomachs rise as if the ship had turned into a falling stone. The captain's voice returned, louder this time but less steady. Remain seated. Remain calm. The situation is under control, but it was not under control. In the corner of the deck, the human's mind raced. He remembered the vibration. He remembered the faint drop in tone. He remembered the heat against his palm. These were not signs of a minor error. These were the death cries of a machine on the edge of failure. Then came the second alarm. This one was not soft. It screamed through the ship like a wounded animal. Red lights flashed along the ceiling, bathing the halls in bloody color. A voice from the bridge shouted across the intercom, "Power drain detected." "Core containment unstable!" Panic erupted. The passengers stood, shouting, demanding answers. Some begged the crew for escape pods, others cursed, their voices rising like thunder in the confined space. The human stayed seated, though his pulse hammered in his ears. He watched the crew run back and forth, their proud movements now frantic, their shining robes catching the red light like fire. One pilot barked orders. "Divert flow." "Seal section 9." Another screamed back, "It won't hold, the containment is cracking." The human's chest tightened. He knew what that meant. A containment failure in the heart of the ship was not just a broken engine. It was death fast and absolute. Another jolt hurled passengers to the ground. A noble Tsari struck his head on a metal bench, his shimmering blood glowing faintly as it spilled. The nobles who once laughed at human weakness now cried out like frightened children. The human clenched his fists. He had seen this before, not here, not in space, but in other machines, other failures. On Earth, he had once seen a factory collapse because no one listened to the early warnings. He had watched a submarine flood because the officers had trusted their perfect design more than the trembling walls around them. He had sworn never to ignore the signs again. He rose from his seat. For the first time, a few aliens noticed him. Their eyes narrowed, confusion mixing with fear. A passenger barked at him in a sharp voice, "Sit down, human. You are nothing here." But he did not sit. His gaze locked on a glowing panel at the side of the hall, one the crew had not yet touched. A maintenance port, the kind used by technicians when the ship was built. He walked toward it, ignoring the stairs. The floor shook again. The red lights dimmed, then flared brighter, as if the ship itself was screaming. Somewhere far below, metal cracked with a deep, dreadful echo. The human quickened his pace. On the bridge, the captain's calm mask finally broke. "Stabilizers are failing. We are being pulled toward the nebula." The nebula. Every passenger knew its name. A swirling cloud of gas and storm, filled with magnetic lightning that ripped apart unshielded ships. No vessel had ever crossed it and survived. The passengers wailed, voices overlapping in chaos. The human reached the maintenance panel. His hands trembled, not with fear but with urgency. He crouched, pressing fingers against the edges, searching for the release. The panel hissed open, revealing a tangle of wires and glowing conduits. He stared for a moment, his mind racing. The design was alien, yes, but the language of machines was the same everywhere: power, flow, pressure, heat. He traced the lines with his eyes, seeing how they connected, how they strained under the failing system. His lips moved silently as he calculated, as if solving a puzzle. Behind him, a voice shouted, "What are you doing, human?" "Leave that alone." He did not answer, because at that moment, as sparks crackled inside the open panel, the truth became clear to him. The ship was not simply failing. It was dying, and if no one acted soon, every soul aboard would die with it. The air in the starship Veora had grown heavy, filled with the stench of burning metal and fear. Passengers pressed against one another, their shimmering skins glowing brighter as panic spread through the halls. The alarms wailed without pause, their red glow painting every corridor like a battlefield. The proud Zari, once calm and certain, now looked like frightened shadows in their own vessel. In the middle of the chaos stood the human. His hand rested against the open maintenance panel, wires sparking like angry snakes inside. For a long moment he did nothing. He simply studied the twisting conduits, his dark eyes sharp, his breath steady. To the passengers it looked like madness. To him it was focus. A crew member spotted him and stormed forward, tall frame towering over the human. "Step away," the alien barked, voice cracking with fear disguised as anger. "You have no right to touch the systems of this ship. You will make things worse." The human turned his head slowly, meeting the alien's glowing eyes. His voice was calm, almost too calm for the madness around them. "Things are already worse. If you keep following your manuals, your ship will be torn apart in minutes." "You know it." "I know it," the alien froze. He wanted to deny it. But the truth was written in the trembling walls, in the uneven hum of the engines, in the red haze filling the room. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Another jolt shook the vessel. A child screamed as a food cart slid across the floor, crashing against the wall. The human gritted his teeth and crouched lower, both hands now inside the panel. He traced the heat of the conduits with his fingers, wincing as sparks burned his skin. Behind him, voices rose. "What is he doing? Stop him before he kills us all." "A human cannot save a Zari ship." The captain's voice thundered through the intercom, desperate now. "Stabilizers failing. Engines at 20%. If containment breaks, we will not survive." The human spoke without looking up. His voice cut through the chaos. "Engines are engines. Yours may glow with alien light, but they live and die like ours. Power flows, heat builds, pressure breaks. You're not losing control because your systems are weak. You're losing control because you built them to follow rules." The passenger stared, confused. He pulled a tool from his pocket. Nothing more than a small multi-tool from Earth, old and scratched. The aliens laughed in disbelief.
"He means to save us with that?"
But the human ignored them. His hands moved quickly now, stripping a wire, twisting it, rerouting it into a glowing conduit that hissed at his touch. The smell of ozone filled the air. Sparks jumped, showering his knuckles with tiny burns. He didn't flinch. "On Earth," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else, "we fix things with whatever we have. We don't always have perfect tools. We don't always have time, but we learn to make things work because if we don't, we die." A young alien pilot stepped closer, her scaled face pale. Her voice shook. You really think you can stop this?" He looked up at her, eyes hard, voice steady. "Not stop it, bend it. Machines can't think. But we can." Another violent tremor ripped through the ship. Panels burst, spraying smoke. Somewhere deep below, a muffled boom echoed like the roar of a collapsing mountain. The crew shouted warnings. Passengers clung to each other, some weeping openly. The human's hands blurred. He cut another wire, slammed it into a junction it was never designed for. The lights above flickered, dimmed, then steadied again. The alarms faltered for half a second before screaming louder. He hissed in frustration, sweat rolling down his face. One noble shouted from the crowd, voice sharp and mocking. This is madness. He will destroy us faster. The human turned, glaring at him. His voice rose for the first time, sharp as broken glass. You're already dying. If you want to wait for your glorious manuals to save you, then sit and wait for death. But if you want to live, you let me work. The noble shrank back, words caught in his throat. The young pilot swallowed hard and nodded. Let him try. The crew exchanged uneasy looks. Pride warred with fear in their glowing eyes. Finally, the tallest among them whispered, We have no choice. The human bent forward again, his fingers moving faster now, his thoughts racing ahead of every spark and hiss. He rerouted flows, twisted conduits, patched heat sinks with strips of torn fabric from his jacket, pressing them against glowing pipes that seared his skin. His body shook from the effort, but he didn't stop. In his mind, he wasn't on a starship anymore. He was back on Earth, crouched beside a broken submarine pump or kneeling on a desert road fixing a failing truck under enemy fire. He remembered every time the odds had said, impossible, and every time he had said, not yet. The ship trembled harder, lights strobing wildly. The human shouted over the roar, voice raw. When I say now, reroute auxiliary power. Do it or this all goes to hell. The young pilot's hands hovered over the controls, sweat gleaming on her scales. Now? Not yet, he barked, twisting one last wire, slamming it into place. Sparks exploded, burning his palms. His teeth clenched from the pain. The alarm screamed higher. The walls shook like thunder. Passengers wailed, clinging to each other. Now, he roared. The pilot slammed her palm against the control. Energy surged through the ship like a tidal wave. The lights flickered, then blazed brighter than before. The alarms cut off mid-scream. For a heartbeat, silence filled the ship. The human sagged back against the wall, chest heaving, smoke rising from his burned hands. Everyone stared at him. Passengers, crew, even the captain, visible through the hollow screen from the bridge. Their glowing eyes were wide, their mouths open. The human wiped sweat from his face with the back of his arm. His voice was hoarse but steady. Engines are engines, he repeated quietly. And for the first time, the Tsari understood. The silence after the alarms died was sharp, almost painful. For the first time since the disaster began, the starship Veora was quiet. The passengers held their breath, their glowing eyes fixed on the human crouched by the open panel. His hands were blackened with burns, smoke rising faintly from his palms. The smell of scorched flesh mixed with the tang of melted wires, filling the corridor with the taste of survival. But the human did not smile. He did not relax. He knew the truth. What he had done was not a repair. It was only a patch, a desperate gamble. The ship was alive for now, but its heart still bled energy. Without something more, the temporary fix would fail, and when it failed, there would be no second chance. The captain's voice returned, softer now, as though the weight of pride had been cracked. Containment is stable for the moment. Engines at 40%. Stabilizers. Unresponsive. He hesitated before admitting the next words. We are still being pulled toward the nebula. The nebula. A storm of living fire. Clouds of charged gas swirled outside, visible now through the wide viewing ports. Electric veins of violet and crimson lightning danced across the dark void, lashing at each other like serpents of pure energy. Even from this distance, passengers felt its pull, like a predator drawing them into its jaws. The human forced himself up, his knees stiff, his chest rising and falling in heavy breaths. He turned toward the crew. Your systems aren't failing one by one. They're chained. You fix one, another breaks. That's why you're losing. If you want the ship to live, you have to break the chain. The crew stared at him, not fully understanding. One pilot, voice sharp with both awe and fear, asked, Break the chain? That could collapse the whole system. The human wiped sweat from his brow with his burned hand and nodded grimly. Exactly. You built a perfect circle. Everything tied, everything dependent. But when one part falls, it drags the rest down. On Earth, we cut the chain. We isolate the failure. We make the machine ugly, unstable, even dangerous, but alive. The aliens exchanged uneasy glances. Their technology was built on elegance, on harmony. To break it on purpose went against everything they believed. Yet the nebula loomed closer, lightning flashing brighter, painting their faces in ghostly colors. The captain's voice finally broke the silence. Do it. The human dropped back to the floor. pulling tools and scraps from his pockets. He had almost nothing. A multi-tool, strips of burned fabric, a cracked coil of wire he had salvaged from the panel itself. But that was enough. It had to be. He tore open more panels, his hands diving into glowing nests of conduits that hummed with lethal power. Sparks exploded as he ripped connections apart, severing links that Zari had sworn must never be broken. The passengers gasped as the lights flickered, the floor groaned, and the ship howled like a wounded animal. A noble shouted, "He's killing us!" But the young pilot from before, eyes fierce now, snapped back, "He's saving us, let him work." The human's arms shook as he twisted two sparking wires together, welding them with nothing but heat and willpower. His burns deepened, his jacket smoked, but he did not stop. He muttered under his breath, half prayer, half calculation. "Pressure here. Reroute there. Don't let it blow." Another jolt shook the vessel, stronger this time. A panel above burst open, showering the hall with fragments of metal. A passenger screamed as a shard cut across his shoulder, glowing blood spilling. The human ignored it. His focus was absolute. He pulled a thick conduit from its socket, forcing it into a port never meant for it. The system roared in protest, alarms flickering back to life, then dying again. For a terrifying second, the ship went completely dark. The only light was the nebula outside, its storms flashing through the windows like the gaze of a god. In that darkness, the passengers held their breath. They thought it was the end. Then, the engines roared. Blue fire burst from the walls, surging back into the ship's veins. Lights flared brighter than before, flooding the halls with silver glow. The artificial gravity steadied, the trembling slowed, and the passengers cried out in disbelief. But the human was not finished. He slammed his hands into another junction, ripping a glowing crystal core free and tossing it aside. "Dead weight," he muttered. Then he grabbed a sparking line, wrapped it around the frame of the panel itself, and jammed it into place. The entire corridor lit up, arcs of lightning crawling across the walls. The aliens screamed and ducked, but the energy settled, flowing into new paths carved by human hands. The ship groaned, not in pain this time, but in relief. Systems once bound in a fragile circle were now jagged, broken, yet alive. Power surged into the engines. On the bridge, the captain's voice returned, filled with stunned awe. "Engines at 60%. Stabilizers returning. Trajectory shifting. We are pulling away from the nebula." Passengers wept, some falling to their knees, others clutching each other as though they had already died and been given life again. The human slumped against the wall, his body trembling, his hands blistered and blackened. He looked up at the young pilot who had trusted him. His voice was raw, barely more than a whisper. "It isn't fixed. It's ugly. It'll need proper work later, but it'll hold. Long enough?" The pilot's glowing eyes shimmered, a mixture of fear and admiration. You turned our perfect machine into chaos, and somehow it lives." The human closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling at him. "Machines don't care about perfect. They care about working." Through the windows, the nebula began to drift away, its storms fading into the distance. The passengers cheered, voices rising like thunder. But their eyes kept returning to the burned human in the corner. He had done the impossible, and the galaxy would never forget it. The roar of the engines spread through the Veora like a heartbeat returning to a dying body. The trembling slowed, the light steadied, and the constant pull of the nebula's storm weakened. For the first time in hours, the ship no longer felt like a tomb. It felt alive again. Passengers rose slowly from the floor, their glowing skins reflecting the soft blue lights. Some touched the walls as if to test whether the miracle was real. Others held each other tightly, shaking with relief. Many still stared at the human. The burned, exhausted figure slumped against the maintenance panel. To them, he was no longer invisible. The captain's voice filled the halls, steady but filled with something rare. Disbelief. "Engines at 70%. Stabilizers restored. We have cleared the nebula's pull." A pause. Then softer, almost reverent. "We are alive." The passengers erupted. Cries, laughter, even sobs filled the air. Nobles who once mocked humans now shouted praise. Children pointed at the man in the corner, their glowing eyes wide with awe. A chant began, voices rising. "The human! The human!" But the human himself did not cheer. He pressed his burned hands against his knees and tried to stand. His body trembled, his vision blurred, but he forced himself upright. His eyes were on the walls, the ceiling, the faint vibration of the floor. He wasn't celebrating because he knew the truth. The ship was breathing again, yes, but it was breathing through broken lungs. His repair was raw, dangerous, and temporary. The young pilot hurried to him, her scaled face pale but glowing faintly. She reached out as if to steady him but stopped, uncertain whether he would accept her hand. "You saved us," she whispered. The human's voice was rough, almost a growl. "I bought you time. That's all. Don't waste it." Her eyes flickered with respect and confusion. The Tsari believed in perfection, in machines that lasted for centuries without flaw. This human had torn their technology apart and forced it into chaos, and yet it lived. One noble, dressed in robes of shining silver, stepped forward. His voice trembled between pride and shame. We laughed at you. Called you fragile, but none of us could do what you just did." The human looked at him, eyes dark and tired. "I didn't do it because I wanted glory. I did it because I wanted to live. And because I don't like watching people die when there's still a chance to fight." The words hit the passengers like a strike. They exchanged looks, their pride wounded but their hearts stirred. For the first time, many of them realized what made humans dangerous. Not their strength, not their weapons, but their refusal to surrender, even when logic said it was over. The ship pressed forward, leaving the nebula behind. Outside the windows, the storm shrank, a swirling mass of violet and crimson lightning fading into the distance. The sight brought relief, but also silence. Everyone knew how close death had been. On the bridge, the captain sent a private message to the crew. "Record everything. Command must know what happened here." His voice shook. They must know what the human did. Back in the passenger deck, the human leaned against the wall, forcing himself to breathe slowly. His hands were burned, his jacket torn, but his eyes were still sharp. He studied the wires he had twisted, the conduits he had ripped apart. Ugly, yes, but alive. A small child approached him timidly, holding a glowing fruit. Her parents tried to pull her back, but she shook free and placed the fruit in his hand. Her voice was soft but clear. "For you." "Thank you." The human blinked. He hadn't expected thanks. He crouched slowly, ignoring the pain in his knees, and handed the fruit back with a faint smile. "Keep it. You'll need your strength more than me." The girl's eyes shimmered. She nodded, clutching the fruit tightly before running back to her family. The young pilot finally spoke again, her voice firm. "You've changed something today. Not just this ship. The way we see your kind." The human gave a weary shrug. "Doesn't matter how you see us. What matters is we're alive. Now keep it that way." But deep inside, he knew it did matter. Every word, every glance, every whisper from the passengers told him that something had shifted. The Tsari had always viewed humans as lesser beings, weak and unimportant. Now they looked at him with something new in their glowing eyes, something that was both respect and fear. The captain's final announcement echoed through the halls. "Set a course for safe space. We owe our survival to the human passenger." His voice hesitated on the last words, as if speaking them carried a weight he had never expected to bear. The passengers clapped, their glowing hands ringing against the metal walls. The human lowered his head, uncomfortable with the attention, but he did not stop them. He knew they weren't cheering him alone. They were cheering the fact that they still had breath in their lungs, light in their eyes, and a future waiting beyond the stars. Yet as he leaned back against the wall, exhaustion pulling at him, his thoughts were not of glory. They were of the nebula, of the cracks in the ship's design, of the arrogance that had nearly killed them all. He wondered how many more ships would fall the same way. He wondered if the galaxy had any idea how fragile its so-called perfection really was. The ship breathed again, but he knew this was only the beginning, and so did the aliens. The Veora glided steadily now, the stars outside calm and distant, the nebula shrinking behind them like a nightmare fading into memory. The ship was alive again, its heartbeat strong though scarred, and the passengers no longer clutched their seats in terror. Yet the silence that filled the corridors was not peace. It was something else, something heavier. All eyes turned to the human. Hours before, he had been invisible, a forgotten passenger in a plain jacket. Now burned and weary, he had done what no Tsari engineer, no noble, no pilot could do. He had saved them all. Gratitude filled the air, but so did something sharper. The passengers whispered in low voices, their glowing eyes watching him with both wonder and unease. He fixed what our best could not. He made the ship live again. If one human can do this, what could their kind do with our warships? The human sat alone in the corner, wrapping strips of cloth around his blistered hands. He was not used to being watched this way. On Earth, he had worked in silence, solving problems no one else wanted to touch. Here, every glance carried weight. Respect, yes, but also fear. The young pilot approached him, her movements cautious as if stepping closer to a dangerous animal. She crouched down, her scaled face lit by the soft glow of the ship's lights. "You should be resting," she said softly. He shook his head. "Machines don't wait for rest. Neither should I." His voice was rough but steady. She studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "You changed everything today. Not just this ship. You changed how we see your people." The human gave a faint smile, one corner of his mouth lifting. Didn't try to change anything. Just didn't want to die. But his words did not erase the truth. He had shown the Tsari something they had never seen before. A human's stubborn will. The refusal to accept defeat even when the universe itself seemed ready to crush them. On the bridge, the captain spoke with his officers in hushed tones. His voice carried pride but also unease. "Our manuals failed. Our perfect design failed. And yet this passenger with nothing but scraps and instinct held us together." One officer leaned closer, whispering sharply, "If humans can do this with no training in our systems, imagine what they could do if they studied our ships. Imagine if they built their own." The captain's glowing eyes narrowed. "That thought troubles me as much as it comforts me." Meanwhile, among the passengers, the debate grew louder. Some praised the human, calling him a miracle, a gift of survival. Others whispered that he was dangerous, that no one so desperate and clever should be trusted. The Tsari had always believed themselves the peak of order and design. To see chaos succeed where order failed shook them deeply. The noble in silver robes who once mocked the human now bowed his head as he passed. But his whispered words betrayed his fear. "If one man can bend our ship, perhaps his kind can bend our empire." The human heard these whispers but said nothing. He focused on tightening the bandages on his hands, on breathing slowly, on listening to the hum of the repaired engines. Yet inside he understood. Respect and fear were close cousins. He had earned both. Later, the young pilot returned with a bowl of glowing broth. She placed it beside him. "For strength," she said. He nodded in thanks, lifting it carefully with burned hands. The warmth soothed him, though his stomach twisted. "Do they always look at strangers like this?" he asked quietly. Her gaze dropped to the floor. "No, we usually ignore them. Or pity them, but you broke the shape of things. That frightens them." He gave a tired laugh. "On Earth, breaking the shape is how we survive." Her eyes lifted, shimmering with something between admiration and worry. "Then your people are stronger than we ever thought." The words lingered, heavy in the air. Outside the windows, stars drifted peacefully, but the peace inside the Veora was fragile. Every passenger now carried the memory of how close death had been, and how a human had saved them when their own kind could not. It was a truth they would never forget, and perhaps never forgive. The captain's final report to command captured the tension perfectly. His voice was calm, but his words sharp. Survival credited to human intervention. Recommend further observation of the species. Their methods are unorthodox. Their resolve, unsettling. As the message sent, the human sat quietly, sipping the last of the broth, unaware of the storm his actions had stirred beyond the nebula. To him, he was still just a passenger. A man who had not wanted to die, but to the Tsari, he had become something else entirely, a warning. The Veora sailed on through calm space now, its wounds hidden beneath steady lights and humming engines. The nebula lay far behind, a storm no one wished to remember, yet no one could forget. Inside the ship, life slowly returned to normal, or tried to. The food carts rolled again, passengers whispered among themselves, and children played softly in the halls. But nothing was truly the same. Every conversation circled back to the human. Every glance toward him carried weight, as if they were staring not at a man, but at a symbol. He sat quietly at the edge of the passenger deck, his burned hands resting on his knees, his jacket torn and smoke-stained. He did not seek attention, but attention clung to him anyway. Passengers avoided standing too close, yet their eyes never left him. Gratitude, respect, and unease swirled together like shadows in their glowing gazes. The young pilot came often checking on him, sometimes bringing broth or bandages. She asked him questions about Earth, about human machines, about the strange way his mind worked under pressure. He answered simply, never boasting, never asking for praise. I didn't plan to be a hero, he told her once, his voice rough but calm. I only planned to get through the day alive. But to the Tsari, his survival was more than instinct. It was revelation. On the bridge, the captain recorded one last message for command. His words were formal, but his tone was shaken. We owe our lives to a human passenger. He defied the limits of our technology, using instinct and improvisation where logic failed. I advise close study of this species. Their methods are dangerous. Their will is unbreakable. He hesitated, then ended with a truth he could not ignore. They must not be underestimated. Far from the bridge, the noble in silver robes sat alone, his pride wounded. He whispered to his companion, if one man could bend our ship with nothing but scraps, imagine what thousands could do. Imagine what millions could become. His voice carried both awe and fear. Word spread quickly through the passengers. By the time the Veora reached safer lanes of travel, the story had already taken on the shape of legend. They spoke of the human who ripped apart perfect machines and gave them new life. They spoke of the fire in his eyes when everyone else had surrendered. They spoke of his burned hands as proof of his sacrifice. To the human himself, these stories meant little. He looked out the wide port windows, watching the stars glide by, his thoughts quiet. He did not think of glory. He thought of Earth, of broken trucks on dirt roads, of submarines patched in the dark, of planes that landed against all odds. He thought of survival, the way humans had always survived. Not with elegance, but with stubbornness, with fire, with the refusal to give up. He had not come to the stars to prove anything. He had only been a passenger. And yet, now the galaxy had seen what humans were capable of. When the Veora finally docked at a great station, crowds gathered. Officials, engineers, nobles, all demanded to see the human who had saved the ship. Some bowed in respect, others studied him like a dangerous weapon. Questions poured in. Praise and suspicion clashed in every word, but the human said little. He stepped off the ship with his burned hands wrapped in cloth, his tired eyes fixed only on the path ahead. He did not linger. He did not celebrate. He simply moved forward as he always had. Behind him, the passengers whispered one last time. He was just a passenger, but he changed everything. Across the galaxy, the report from the Veora spread. On distant worlds, leaders read the captain's words with uneasy silence. Some saw humans as allies to be welcomed. Others saw them as threats to be contained. But none dismissed them anymore. The image of a single human, burned and stubborn, saving a ship where the proud Tsari had failed, would not fade. It would ripple across star systems, shaping decisions, stirring fear, and planting seeds of respect. And somewhere on a small blue planet called Earth, humanity carried on as always, fixing what was broken, fighting for breath, refusing to bow to impossible odds. The galaxy had finally seen them, and it would never look away again.